So we are sitting here with the Richard Dolan. Hey, Richard. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks very much.
So I know obviously one big thing you talk about with everything is disclosure, but that is kind of a bit of a vague term because it has so many different implications. There's different levels of disclosure. But let's say there is some kind of formal acknowledgement among the government. Maybe not like a full disclosure like this is all of our secrets. Like, I mean, that will never happen. But let's say there's something like, you know what, we have been investigating the UFO issue. We don't know what it is, but we have been looking into it. How do you think a simple formal acknowledgement like that would affect society as we know? What do you think that version of post-disclosure world will look like?
It's a good question. We're getting close to this because, as a number of the people at this event here have pointed out, the New York Times last December of 2017 did in fact publish a couple of articles that were almost like what you were saying here. So there was a tacit acknowledgement that the Pentagon had been studying the UFO phenomenon and had spent several million dollars doing so. So there was a bit of this moving the discourse forward into an acknowledgement of the UFO reality. But it wasn't quite the same as a disclosure. I don't interpret it that way yet. It was kind of inching toward there. So if a significant government agency, let's say a U.S. president or some other high-level person were to say, look, this is actually quite real. We have these reports. We don't know what they are. I think what it would probably do is start a blizzard of questions. I think rather than panic, rather than people wanting you know, the deep investigations like where are the bodies and where's the technology, I think instead we would see a lot of follow-up questions from journalists seeking serious clarification. So I think it would probably open up problems more than solve them. So that's why I think like a partial disclosure would probably be a very questionable idea for any government or any official body, because it's like an unsatisfying sort of a thing. So if you make a partial admission, this is where like some people in this field have been saying, you know, that what the government wants to do, the U.S. government wants to do, is to sort of control this process, rolling it out. And I've never had an easy way of understanding how anyone could think that they would be able to do that. You know, if you start the disclosure process a little bit, you've got to be very confident that you're going to maintain total control over this narrative every step of the way. And the problem with that idea is that, you know, most of the public is not particularly knowledgeable about this, but enough of us are knowledgeable enough that we'll know what questions to be asking. And the difference is that nowadays there'll be more people willing to listen to people asking some of these difficult questions. So it seems really a risky proposition to go down disclosure road. And that's why I've always maintained it's impossible, but it is true, it's kind of inevitable. I think every time we get a new admission, a new revelation, it's like it just gets pushed inexorably that much further down. And the real question is, what's the point of no return? There's got to be a point of no return. I just don't know what that point is.
If you were to imagine yourself in the shoes, and this is a big label, but of the government or that authority, and you were to give counsel, advice to them on how they should possibly even attempt to begin to disclose this issue, what would you do if you were in their shoes?
That's a good question. I think that I would tell the president, let's get a team together and organize a timeline of how we're going to roll this out. Like, you're really going to have to roll out there's a lot of elements to this. So there's the political blowback and how to handle all of that. There's the issue of how much to tell the world about these other beings, assuming that they know something about them. How much are they going to tell? Are they going to tell every single thing that they know? Are they going to tell all of the definite intelligence, the partial intelligence, or are they just kind of roll it out a little bit at a time? Are they going to, you know, talk about the technologies that presumably, undoubtedly, have been developed as a result of this secrecy? Not simply the technologies that were recovered through whatever kinds of crash retrievals, but technologies that have been developed that are in response to this phenomenon, that are probably deeply classified. Chances are they're not going to tell all that stuff, but they might at least acknowledge to the public. I might say, look, you know, for honesty and transparency, and furthermore, if you want to really cement your legacy for world history, and there are some people who might be willing to do that, you know, there are certain things that you want to be able to tell. There are certain things you might say to the public, we can't yet disclose everything. That's fair. But if you at least are starting an honest dialogue with the public, you actually might be doing something really, really important for humanity. The thing that I've been saying all along that UFO secrecy has done that's damaging is that it kind of messes with our psychology. When you have this huge phenomenon that, excuse me, it's worldwide. Millions of people deal with it, and yet they can't really talk about it. They're constrained due to social pressures, ridicule, because of this cover-up. It does bad things to a society, in my opinion. On top of that, the secrecy has cost a certain amount of money. I don't know how much money, but I suspect a lot. The scientific R&D, the manufacturing of a completely separate infrastructure, it's expensive. And I mean, I don't know what motivation a president or a prime minister would really have in opening this up, except, you know, doing the right thing. And I've got to think that there's someone in the right position that maybe that argument would work on them. It's actually time to do the right thing.
Let's hope so. Do you think, with everything going on in terms of dumbing down society in a general, like there's so many different theories, but whether it's chemtrails, GMOs, vaccines, different mind control technologies,
right,
whatever the case is, do you think that there are certain groups, well, we know there are certain groups that would benefit from just preventing disclosure from happening, but do you think those same groups might be behind some of these other methods, and that might be one of the reasons for this, is to prevent people from waking up and asking these questions, and this is kind of a desperate attempt?
Yeah, I kind of assume it's all part of the same system. So I think that the dumbing down of the public, I don't think that's accidental. I think that's deliberate. I think you know, the way to control a population. See, the UFO cover-up is one of several cover-ups. It's not the only one, but it's a bad one. And to maintain it increasingly in this world, in a world where now we're going to have runaway artificial intelligence and what people call the robo-apocalypse and the continuing offshoring of jobs. I mean, all of this is coming together as a kind of perfect storm, and UFO secrecy is not helping. But in that situation, it seems to me that those people who are at the very top of our hierarchy are very interested in having a dumbed-down population, because that's the easiest way to control people. You toxify their bodies with horrible foods, with pharmaceuticals, legal and illegal drugs. You tacitly allow to wash through the public, through entertainment that's positively degrading, and you know, that just is unhealthy for people, with news that's not news at all, and all of that. So, and with an education system, particularly in the U.S., I have to say, that's less than worthless. I mean, honestly, people are better off just not going to school. I think they're almost better off not going to the university anymore. I don't know what good these things do for people. They just siphon their money out of their bank account. But certainly the public school systems in the U.S. are so bad. I mean, unless you really belong to a wealthy enough school district, I guess it's okay. But even then, the indoctrination is just so bad now. I think kids are better off not going to these schools. So the whole system is so bad that I think it is designed not explicitly at each level. Like, I think school administrators in their own way think that they're doing something good, but they're just brainwashed themselves. So I think at the highest level, yeah, there's a goal. And you know, there's a lady named Charlotte Iserby who wrote a book called The Deliberate Dumbing Down of the American Public. I think that's what it was called. She was a former Secretary of Education, I think, in the Reagan administration way back. She's a very smart lady. I think she knows what she's talking about. And then there's John Taylor Gatto, another educator in America, former New York City school teacher who really knows just how awful the U.S. education system is. And I think a lot of this is by design. So when we talk about the government offering a kind of disclosure, I just keep thinking this is a government that is deeply in bed with all of these interests. It's a government that's doing other things that are really awful, like, you know, classified military weapons like the HARP array. I'm reading another book on HARP and chemtrails. It's a very good book.
What do you know about HARP and chemtrails? What have you uncovered?
Well, I've read a number of books on this over the years, so I'm no more of an expert than anyone else has read a few books on it. But the HARP array, there's several of them, the famous ones in Gakona, Alaska, that is a multifaceted tool, a multifaceted weapon. So it's designed, you know, officially to have discrete ultra heating of the ionosphere for scientific research purposes. And they call it scientific research because that allows them to get out of all kinds of weapons treaties by which nations are not allowed to fuck with the environment. Sorry, but that's really the only word I can think of here. You're not allowed to do environmental degradation for all kinds of purposes by treaty. And, but you're allowed to do all kinds of things for research. But anyway, what the HARP array is about is simply, it's a tool that can allow you to do deep underground tomography, so you can look for underground bases, underground weapons, underground mineral site deposits if you want to make a lot of money that way. But it can also, I'm reading now with the chemtrail phenomenon, it can be used for a variety of military purposes, that including weather modification, but even much more than that. So I only brought it up in passing because I am reading the book right now, but also when you talk about what the U.S. government in particular is doing, you know, these are the people we're going to trust with disclosure of UFOs. They're right now engaging in an unbelievable array of deeply criminal activities. Forgive me if I'm a little more skeptical on the genuineness of motivations of people to engage in a disclosure. I just, I need a little convincing.
For sure. One thing I want to talk about too that I think is really contributing to this problem is the complicit media, the censorship of the mainstream media, like the big guys,
well,
essentially.
Well, that's worse and worse every year.
Yeah, and one thing I was wondering if you even had an insight to is I'm sure you've seen some of those videos where they do mashups of all these journalists from various news organizations across the country, all talking at the same time, reading essentially the same script.
Oh yeah.
Who
Right.
do you think's writing that script when it goes across the whole country?
That's the question.
Who's writing that one script?
That's a great question. I know exactly what you're talking. Well, this has been discussed for such a long time now. They obviously getting their marching orders from somewhere. It's so tightly coordinated and controlled. The news stories are so totally coordinated. I don't know. I mean, I don't know, like, why is ABC and NBC and CBS as if they're just one network, which basically they seem to be one network. So Fox is a little different from MSNBC, fine, whatever. But fundamentally, these networks. So when the UFO story came out last December, you had the Washington Post along with the New York Times and Politico all coming out simultaneously with the same story. So how does that happen? Why does that happen? Right. So clearly there's coordination. You know, back during the Cold War, there was a program known as Operation Mockingbird, and I can see you know what it is, and hopefully viewers know what this was, but everyone should know what Mockingbird was. Mockingbird was a CIA-orchestrated news media manipulation program. It went for decades. It involved hundreds of journalists on the CIA payroll covertly. And, you know, in the 70s, they said, well, we don't do that anymore since we've been outed on it. But of course, that's a complete lie. I mean, the Mockingbird system is more widespread and deeper, and it's not just the CIA, it's the Pentagon, it's and it's not just the US. You know, it's everywhere. I mean, the Canadian system, I don't think is really radically different. The UK, they're, if possible, worse in how their media is managed by the government and the intelligence community. And Europe, I don't know. I mean, there was a deceased German journalist named Dr. Udo Ulfkotter. He just died a year and a half ago, who talked explicitly about how all European media was controlled by the CIA. So when you talk about the media and like who sends their marching orders, I do think sometimes it is from Langley, Langley, Virginia, CIA headquarters. But it could be any of these places. It could be somewhere in the Pentagon. It could be coordination among the boards of the various news media outlets. I don't know. It's very suspicious. You know, I mean, they're all so homogenized. Once upon a time, we had hundreds of independent journalistic outlets, hundreds of independent newspapers and television. I mean, it was all, they actually competed with each other. Those days are so long gone. That's a distant memory. So honestly, it's like with public education. You're better off avoiding the Western news media. It's actually, it's toxic. It's a toxic poison for your mind. When in the U.S. people and Canada, people are obsessed with Donald Trump, obsessed. And, you know, you want to know who's running the United States political system. Okay, that's important to know. But the obsession that people have with him is clearly a result of corporate media fixation. And so it just tells me when people are unduly fixated on this man, this one man, that they need to step back and start looking at this control system for what it is. And by the way, Trump's made most of them rich beyond anything because they realize he brings in the ratings. That's one of the big reasons they've covered him. I mean, that's the truth. But the Western news media system is so unbelievably toxic. People just need to shut it out. I mean, the only excuse that anyone should ever have for following any Western news media is to know what they're supposed to be thinking, to know what the powers that be actually want them to think. That is the only reason. So you go into Western news media as a counterintelligence operative. That's really what it's all about. And if you're not going in with that purpose, you're going to get hosed, as the Canadians would say.
I laugh because I honestly actually make a deliberate point every now and then to watch the mainstream news just so I can know what's being pumped into the masses, so I know what I'm up against. I have to know what's being like put in there.
It's painful.
It is painful.
It's like painful to watch these people. It's like, honestly, when you watch the TV, especially like in the U.S., the national news, the locals are a little more tolerable. They're a little less polished. You know, the major national news media in the U.S., these consultants, these talk show people, these people behind the desk, they're horrible to look at. They're so unbelievably manicured, so incredibly controlled, so obviously false. Who the hell would spend their time watching these people? I mean, I really wonder. But there are people who watch them.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just horrible.
Yeah. In regards to the secret space program, and by that, because there's so many implications, but I'm talking about the aspect of it where there might be industries or departments of government looking into the UFO phenomenon, that side of it.
Right.
Do you think this whole thing where we have this illusion in our media anyways, where it's like Russia versus China versus Canada versus US and all this, that maybe on this level it seems that way, but when it comes to the secret space program, maybe they all might be working together? Or do you think there's still separate secret space programs?
Yes, I don't know the answer to that, actually. There has been a history of some collaboration, all right, between the US and Russia and other nations relating to some elements of the UFO phenomenon. There was a treaty back in 1971 by which the US and the Soviet Union at that time were signatories it was kind of a cooperative agreement that they came to at that particular time. And at other points in history, there have been communications between those nations relating to space. So it's totally possible that there's some kind of collaboration or communication or cooperation, but I don't know what that would be. I mean, I'm pretty confident in believing that the United States and Russia today are in a kind of a heightened a real Cold War, where the United States is doing everything possible to take Vladimir Putin out of power. And they're failing because He's genuinely popular. It's not fake. It's not like fake polls. The Russians love him, generally speaking, and the U.S. is not really able to take him out. The best that they could do is they took Ukraine away from Russia through the CIA coup, the Maidan coup of 2014. It's the closest they've gotten. But it is a definite war. It's basically what's now called a full court press type of a war that's going on. So hybrid warfare. I've read a whole book on hybrid warfare. You'd think I would remember this, but that's what's happening. So hybrid warfare is not like war in the trenches, guys with guns shooting at each other. Hybrid warfare includes that, but it includes much more. So it includes cyber warfare, it includes surveillance, it includes propaganda, it includes political warfare, it includes economic warfare. That's a full court press. And that's what the U.S. is engaging against Russia right now. And so in that type of an environment, and Russia, you know, is will do what it can, either to defend itself or to counterattack. I'm sure that's true. But this is a serious war that's going on, but it's all covert. And I don't think that's fake. So in that kind of a situation, I just don't know how much they're going to be cooperating. I just don't know.
Why do you think, I mean, because we hear stories, and we have evidence of so many different countries either recovering maybe some kind of craft, or like this different things happening throughout different countries across the world. Why do you think it hasn't been where one country yet is like, screw this, I'm tired of... Oh, no, well, that's an easy one. So there's only a few countries that are outside the U.S. orbit of power.
But why?
So Russia and China.
Okay.
Basically, and Syria and North Korea. Pretty much every other country is never going to defy the United States.
Why?
The United States national security complex, has gotten every single national leader bribed, blackmailed, controlled. They're all controlled. We know from Snowden's revelations of a few years ago that the president of Brazil at that time, Dilma Rousseff, her phone, her email, all of her ministers, they were all monitored by NSA. And then, of course, they ousted her in what was called the Wall Street coup of 2016. That's a whole other story. We know that Angela Merkel, alleged close ally of the United States, of Germany, well, they had her phone. They had her cell phone. There's no exception. So here's the thing. Like, if you were a national leader of some country and you decided, screw the United States monopoly on this, we're going to get the secret out. Ask yourself, how would you do it without the NSA knowing? Without the CIA knowing? You're going to talk to any of your cabinet members? Well, then the CIA is going to know. NSA is going to know. They've got ears and eyes everywhere. There is no place to hide. Not a single place in this world. So if you're going to do it, you'd better like find a way to do it so that they actually don't know that you're doing it, because they're not going to take kindly to you undercutting their monopoly of power on this. It's like nations don't really matter that much anymore. Those days are kind of gone. I mean, we have the facade of nations, but the reality of nations is very different. 500 years ago, Niccolo Machiavelli wrote a piece in his book, Discourses on Livy. And he said, this is a paraphrase, but it's accurate. He said, if you want to have a revolution and really make it stick, like really get things done, transform the society, you need to maintain a semblance of the old forms of power, because that's all people ever notice. You can have fundamental transformations of a society, but if you keep the forms, so in the US, that's President, Supreme Court, Congress. Internationally, that means separate nations. So you have the same, it's like a dead body, but he's wearing the same clothes he had on yesterday. You poke him with a stick, he's not moving, but you think, well, his clothes are the same, he's probably fine. That's actually our world. So the body's kind of dead, but it's got the trappings that it's always had. And so that's the thing with nations. And so national sovereignty, independence, that's just not really, that's kind of an illusion. And it's not that nations have no ability for any self-determination. Yeah, they do have some, but for the big picture, for the big things, no. That's gone. Those days are gone. And the United States, NSA, NRO, intelligence community, in cooperation with their leading partners, which would include Canada, which would include UK, some of the European nations, Israel. Those are the top tier, you know, maybe Australia. Those are partnerships. UK, they run everything behind the scenes. And then you've got junior level partnerships, like Brazil would be, or Poland. And, you know, and some of these nations are only good for serving up a population for the labor market so they can become open air prisons, like Greece is happening now. Greece is just an open air prison. That's all Greece is. So Greece is a lower level partner of the United States. So every nation's got its place. And, but the U.S. intelligence, national security community, financial community, they've got the goods. And these nations are not. Now, Russia is a wild card and China is a wild card because they're powerful and they're outside that sphere. And I don't know what they're going to do. Like Bassett, Steve was arguing that Putin might do it ahead of Trump. Well, Putin might do it. You know, maybe Vladimir Putin will be the disclosure president of the world. I would actually like to see that. I said this once before in an interview. I was asked, you know, did I think Obama at that time would jump ahead of Putin to preserve his legacy? And I said, wow, I had not thought about this, but I would actually prefer to see the Russians do it. If the Americans were to do disclosure, who's going to trust them? I mean, really, quite seriously, Americans their word internationally is worthless. Americans don't keep their word internationally. Who would actually ever believe the Americans? So, and they've been identified forever as the heart of the cover-up anyway. So let the Chinese or the Russians do it for my taste. I'd love to see that.
I have two more questions for you.
Yeah.
A million, but two more for today. One thing I want to talk about, it just prompted me, when you were talking about the NSA and surveillance and everything, I've just started to dabble into this, so I don't know if you've researched this at all yet, but have you heard of or what your thoughts are on the people think that these agencies might have an ability to possibly monitor our thoughts through monitoring certain brave-wave frequencies that give off certain, I don't even know much about it, but have you heard of any of this?
Oh, yeah.
What are your thoughts about it?
Well, first of all, they can monitor your thoughts through your web searches and your email, and they can create like a Minority Report type of profile on you or me or anyone else. So like on that level alone, they could probably create a file on you in which they might know aspects of your personality better than you would know, because they have access to all the data and they have algorithms and they can study that, and they're probably really good at that right now. So that's one thing. But in terms of what you're asking, I don't know how far they are. I mean, you know, I've encountered, excuse me, articles that have at least made the claim that scientists are able to identify through understanding your brain waves, your brain activity, that is, what parts of your brain are lighting up and so forth. And they're increasingly able to use that information to kind of read your mind. Now, from what I understand, the latest version of that technology is with wires and electrodes, and I don't know if they can do this remotely, although who knows, probably they can, right?
Well, who knows what we're actually emitting when we think? Like maybe there is something measurable that they...
Yeah, no, totally, and that's absolutely possible. I don't know what the technology is for that. As far as the official stuff that we know about, through electrodes attached to your brain or your skull, it is possible to understand certain words that you can think. It may be possible to see images that you're thinking. And it's definitely possible to start putting together a pattern of like your general types of thoughts. So now that's all by hooking you up, as far as we know. Now, is it possible to do it remotely? If it isn't now, I'm sure I have to assume at some point. And then there's the other things. Tracy and I like to watch futuristic sci-fi shows. So one was called Humans, and it's about synthetic humans of the near future. And one interesting thing about them is that they can read your face and they know if you're lying by looking at your pupil dilation.
I know people in the military who've done this to me while I'm talking, and they're like, oh, you just said that your pupils are dilating, and I didn't know what they were talking about. But so, I mean, that's real science, that's real physiology.
And there's obviously a lot of other things about body language that I don't know that can identify if someone's lying or truthful or whatever. And you can only assume that there's all kinds of body language algorithms that already, you know, who knows how far they're going to go. So in terms of reading your mind, as it were, there's different ways they can do it. And the real question is, how far, how comprehensive, and who's going to get the data?
What it's going to be used for.
And what it'll be used for. Absolutely.
So last big one I have, and this is going to be, of course, none of us really have the answer to this, but based on everything you've researched, on the people you've talked to, just everything, what your best, I don't want to say guess, but it's okay, essentially, so we know that most of the presidents, prime ministers are nothing more than puppets. We know that most of them are so much basically just reading off teleprompters, not all, but most,
yes.
And are serving a certain
I would agree with that.
Okay. Who do you think the so-called puppet masters are? Are they what you would call certain private industries, secret societies, maybe an extraterrestrial presence, a combination?
Well, for many years it was David Rockefeller. Mm-hmm. He was one, without a doubt. You know, Rockefeller was a founding member of the Bilderberg, founding member of the Trilateral Committee, and a long-time dominant member of the Council on Foreign Relations. And excuse me. So, yes, David Rockefeller, who was protege of Henry Kissinger, and basically he made Jimmy Carter president, and much more about David Rockefeller. So there, and he was, of course, the head of the Chase Bank of New York and so many other financial connections. It's not that he was the richest man in the world. He was one of the richest men in the world, but he was the most centrally positioned in terms of financial power. And but he was just one, and there's the, I assume, I don't know the details of the Rothschild family, but I've never really seen any analysis that truly tells me how they've lost their wealth. Like, they were, through the 19th century, clearly the most powerful financial group in the world. Absolutely, and any historian will agree to that. We're told that they lost it all during World War II. Well, they didn't lose it all, because they still had the Bank of England. They had other banks in Europe where they were still quite dominant. So I would like to see a really good analysis, frankly, of the Rothschild influence. And then, you know, there's some of the other old banking families, and Morgans, and they're the old families.
13 bloodlines is one common.
Yeah, I'm not expert in this. I would not pretend, but I do think that there's a definite behind-the-scenes power structure, primarily financial, that has inordinate amount of power. I mean, look, if you have a, as I've often put it, if you have a room of 100 people and there's $100 in that room, in our little room, one person owns about half of those dollars. That's the top 1% of wealth owners. And the top 1% of that 1% has an inordinate amount of that money. So in that room, who's going to be in the best position to manipulate all of the institutions that make that room go? It's that guy with all that money.
Adding to what you were saying, we were talking about the education system earlier. One thing, I can't remember for the life of me, but it was either the Rockefellers or the Rothschilds, was one of the two for sure. When it came to a bunch of the education material, so in universities, the books, okay, the publishing company that was responsible for making almost all the books in universities was one of those families. So
really?
I remember reading that and just being like,
why am I not surprised?
I was just kidding. Why am I not surprised?
Yeah, it's a rigged system.
Yeah.
You know, George Carlin put it really best toward the end of his life. He says, look, the game is rigged, and there's a big club, and you and I are not in that big club, and it's really true. But there's, you know, the one thing that keeps me going is, some people say, wow, you're such a downer. How do you keep going? And the reason I keep going is I realize human history has always been filled with injustice. It's always been filled with horrible, terrible things that have happened to us, and still we keep going. We keep finding a way. And not only do we keep going, we've actually created, for all of the injustice, a really amazing civilization here, an amazing society, where we can do things like have live stream or webcam YouTube videos and things like that. It's actually really amazing. So there's hope for us. We, the people, have actually got we have one power that was not foreseen 20 plus years ago, and that's the web. Now the web is, there's motions in place to tightly control that web, but it's still kind of free right now. And as a result, we've created a kind of public space that was unheard of 20 plus years ago. Absolutely unheard of. It's toxic in many ways. It's not perfect, but it's there, and it's still ours. And it hasn't yet been taken away from us, and we need to fight, by the way, to keep it, because there's all kinds of groups out there that want to take it away. But I still believe in it, and I think we still have the ability to make this world a better place. And really, the best way to start is by being brave and being good, having integrity, and fighting for the truth, with some compassion for the other side. Also, because just because someone disagrees with us doesn't make them a bad person. We're in a point in our society now where we're so polarized. It really frightens me in a way that I've never been scared before in this lifetime, where people will demonize someone else just because of their political opinion. It's the worst thing to do.
Yes.
All right? I don't know about you, but I have relatives and they have different political opinions than me, but we have to live together. So, and by the way, the divisiveness doesn't help us in getting to the bottom of these important issues. Like, that divides us, and we need to be looking at bigger quarry than some of the issues that we're killing each other over these days.
I agree. All right, Richard, thank you so much. It's been awesome.